up there. Is that where you are right now, Lake Tahoe? I wish I could be there. No,
You're muted.
Unmute yourself. It's John. It's John Wynn. You have to unmute yourself. I want to hear what you're saying.
So I'm a little bit far north of you, up in the San Joaquin Valley in Stockton. But,
nice.
Yeah, no, not in Tahoe.
Not too smoky for you? Is it smoky there for a while? There was
for about a month. I didn't get outside to exercise, but the past week or so, it's been beautiful. I think the AQI was 1 today.
Oh, wow. That's good.
But,
what was it like? How was it at its worst? I mean, I just looked, the pictures looked terrible. We just mostly had orange skies and a little bit of smoke in the air, but nothing like up there.
Yeah. We would get it from different directions. Yeah, just depending on which way the wind was blowing.
Dr. Sletten, I believe Josh said go ahead and get started.
Oh, he did. Okay. I see it in there. Josh, are you there or are you not there? Can I, anyway, welcome everybody again to the Three Winds. Yeah, today on my sort of the title of this time together is, the 3 or the 4 white powders. And I'm going to get to that. But as a teaser, I'm going to talk about that candy bar that you just ate, and think about what it does to our endocrine system and to us neurologically. And just to review, last time, you remember we talked about leptin and ghrelin and these neurohormones that come out of our fat cells or out of our stomach that are actually, constantly sort of pushing and affecting our brain in different areas to get us to either be hungry or stop being hungry. And just to review that, part of that candy bar that we eat is a response to that possible feeling of hunger. And hunger is really complicated from a neurologic standpoint because, a lot of people can get over that hump of that neurologic hunger and get going, but most of us have such availability to food that we just give into it and have whatever that is that seems like it might sate us. And that's where the word satiety comes from. And so, but it's short-lived. And so hopefully I'll try to keep your attention, Maria, when the sugar goes to the low part of your blood supply. But I thought I'd talk first. There's 2 things I want to talk about today. And being a sports medicine doctor, I'm always trying to talk to people about sports and their injuries, of course, but also about like lifestyle and ways that an active lifestyle can affect disease processes and ultimately affect your disease processes, which are part of your brain. And I think I'll finish today, talking a little bit about the effect on brain and exercise. But I just want to talk just about exercise. And every time I read a paper on lifestyle medicine, and they talk about food and they talk about habits and they talk about certain things, the one sort of common activity, the one common sort of injection into that person's lifestyle that has an unwavering positive effect on that particular disease is exercise. And the problem is it's not being sold by a pharmaceutical industry, or it's not being sold by drug companies or by even supplement companies, and it's not being anything. All it is just, look, you just have to go out and do and be active, and you will affect your long-term health. And so let's talk about diabetes for a second. We have to have a certain level of blood sugar in our body. and our brain is actually one of our greatest sort of nonstop sort of, consumers of sugar in our blood sugar. And our brain really detects when the blood sugar gets low. We get nervous. Sometimes we get a little anxious. And that's what we sort of equate to hypo or low glycemia, hypoglycemia. It's a pretty hard thing to diagnose, actually. People say, well, doctor, I'm hypoglycemic. That's why I'm, you know, that's why I'm so nasty right now, or what have you. But it really is hard to diagnose that unless you were actually walking around. You could actually prick someone's finger and say, wow, your blood sugar is a little bit low. But our bodies are really good at keeping that blood sugar in a very, very tight range. And that's the miracle of the pancreas and this, this hormone called insulin. And everybody's heard of insulin. Has anybody here know anybody with diabetes? You can just do your little thing with your hand or thumbs up, or if you don't know anybody with diabetes, that's surprising because it's a very, very common condition. The effects of exercise on just the blood sugar situation is really profound. And what does it do? Well, let's talk about in the presence of diabetes, because what's happened in diabetes, there's two things that have happened. You've become sort of resistant to the insulin that you make in your pancreas. So your pancreas is this, this organ that sits right behind your stomach, and it produces all kinds of hormones. And the main thing that we've known about pancreas lately is all these really famous people who got pancreatic cancer. I mean, it seems like there's an epidemic of pancreatic cancer out there and famous people. One of the things that the pancreas does is it shoots out insulin when our blood sugar goes up, and it helps that insulin to be deposited into the cells of our muscles and into cells of our body. It's super important. We need it. And if we keep our blood sugar up so much that the pancreas sort of burns out over time, and that is an example of type 2 diabetes, or what we used to call, non-insulin dependent diabetes. And that's the most hereditary type of diabetes, by the way. So if you have somebody in your family who has diabetes that you're related to, you actually have a higher risk of getting that type of diabetes too. But the nice thing about that type of diabetes is it's completely, almost completely preventive. It's preventable. And so the type 1 diabetes is very interesting. A lot of times it'll come on when someone's a child or a young person, and suddenly they go into this crisis of diabetic ketoacidosis. They go to the emergency room, they say, sorry, but you're diabetic. And you're like, what the heck? It's not in my family. What happened? Life, you will die. And so that's type 1 diabetes. That's the kind where people are measuring their insulin all the time. So there's two types of diabetes. Exercise, it has a positive effect on both of those types of diabetes. One of those, and I'll talk about type 1 first, actually allows you to decrease your blood sugar. That's what exercise does. It decreases the blood sugar, therefore decreasing the amount of insulin that someone requires to take. And we have a number of athletes at Cal State Northridge that are diabetic. They tend to, they sometimes they gravitate toward the more endurance type sports, but sometimes they're just in sports like baseball, where it's all their energy expended is all in sort of short bursts. Those are actually a little easier to manage. But some of the more sophisticated diabetics who want to be endurance athletes, they'll actually be measuring their blood sugar, in the middle of a race or during a workout to keep that level, and they'll be able to take in some sugar if they need it, or actually shoot some insulin in if they need it. With these ports that are actually attached to them. So the technology of the insulin port has skyrocketed in the past, probably 10 to 20 years, so that people can maintain really active lifestyles. But what's true about regular physical activity, is that that insulin requirement is actually decreased in that particular diabetic, and that's really good because it means they have to take less of that drug. But I think for this group and in general, and the biggest epidemic that's going on in this country is type 2 diabetes, and so there's two things that go wrong here. Like I said, the insulin kind of gets burned out, and our body becomes sort of resistant to the insulin that we make because it's just on all the time, and that's because the sugar is so high. And so by the pancreas slowly burning out, we start to raise our blood sugar, okay? And by raising our blood sugar, we become at risk for all the vascular effects of diabetes that are really the main problems of diabetes that actually hurt us in the long run. So what is this type 2 diabetes and how can exercise affect that? Once again, it decreases the blood sugar naturally. And then it also increases insulin, or sorry, increases insulin resistance, or sorry, increases insulin sensitivity. So that's, and the good news here is that over time, you might be able to actually reverse type 2 diabetes with the right lifestyle and injection of exercise, a responsible diet, and weight loss. And that's really hopeful for the person who's really dedicated to this. What are some of the risks of exercise in diabetes? Well, one can become hypoglycemic. And if you ever come along somebody who you know is diabetic, and maybe they're a little bit, looking a little bit faint, and you're wondering, oh my gosh, are they hyperglycemic? Are they hypoglycemic? What is it? Just remember this from an emergency standpoint. Just give them sugar. Just give a diabetic sugar if they're passed out. If they're passed out, sometimes they have a little glucagon injection you can give, or if you can put a little sugar underneath their tongue, get some sugar into their body. Why is that? Because if their blood sugar is down there around 50 or 60, the normal range being around 80 to 100, if it's down low and your brain is starving for that glucose, you start to lose brain cells, and you start to have a very sort of persistent and maybe permanent negative effect of that persistent low glucose. And by giving a little bit of sugar, you can save their life. What if what if their sugar is high? Well, if you've taken a blood sugar that's high, say it's 200 or 300, and you've given them some sugar and you made it 350, what have you done? Nothing, right? It's just a little bit higher, but you haven't solved the problem of them why they're passed out, but at least, it's not the sugar being too low. So that's just a little tidbit of sort of acute care, diabetes medicine. So let's go backwards in time to the person who may be already diabetic and go to the person who might be pre-diabetic. And in pre-diabetes, you might go to the doctor and how you go to the doctor and the doctor's going to do some tests. And I don't know about you, but I always study. I study for my tests. That's why I did well in school. So by studying for a test, you think, well, I'm going to fool this doctor and I'm going to spiff up my sugar. I'm going to be really good for 3 days. I'm not going to eat any candy bars. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to just eat, spinach, and then I'm going to pass that test that he does. And the doctor has a little way to fool you, in that he does this test called the Hemoglobin A1C. And what is that? You've probably heard of hemoglobin before. It carries oxygen around. It's really important for VO2 max and how good of athlete you are, etc. You can get, if you become anemic, your hemoglobin goes down. That's what their iron is attached to. But there's a little sugar that attaches to that hemoglobin A1C, that actually gives a sense of what your blood sugar is over the previous 30 days. So there's no fooling that test. It's going to tell you what you've been doing for the past 30 days in terms of what the average blood sugar has been. So when you see that test, you'll see that it's about, if it's really good, it's 4 to 5, 5 to 5.5 is okay. But if you start getting about 5.7, getting close to 6.0, that means that equates to an average blood sugar over that month or that 30 days of about 120, 130, 140, and that's too high, right? That's way higher than 100. And so the hemoglobin AC is one way to tell that someone's creeping up and they're what they might be called pre-diabetic. And that is where a lot of people are right now. And this is what this program is about, is trying to keep people from moving on to the next level of full-on diagnosis of diabetes. Because man, having diabetes like really changes everything. You got to go to the doctor all the time. You got to take these medicines. And what do the medicines do? Well, the medicines are designed in a lot of ways, and they're not shots. It's not like the full type 1 diabetes yet. Some people progress to insulin requiring diabetes when they have type 2. But most people can manage with these medicines that are just hypoglycemic drugs that help to decrease the blood sugar in your body. And it's as simple as that. They have their side effects. But what's happening there is the disease of diabetes is still progressive. And if you think about diabetes, there's two pathways of diabetes. There's all that endocrine stuff, that insulin, the hormone, the high sugar, the low sugar, the insulin response, etc. And then there's this vascular path of diabetes. And what happens in this pathway is you have all these problems with with circulation, with blood pressure, with hardening of arteries, with risk of stroke. And it's a microvascular disease, meaning it all happens at the very ends of the blood vessels. So you've probably heard of people who are diabetic, who are really diabetic, and they like lost their foot or lost a toe. And what happens is the blood vessels, as they get all the way down and they get really, really small, they start to be diseased and they start to harden off. And what happens when they harden is the blood can't even get to the end of those very little capillaries. And what happens is the people start losing some feeling in their fingertips, maybe in their toes, and maybe you've heard of people having those side effects. And that's really a later side effect, but it's this vascular disease that is hard to slow down. It's really hard to slow down. And even if you do a good job of keeping your blood sugar in line, the vascular progression of diabetes tends to go forward. And that's the hard part about that disease. Stephen, you in the front row. Got to unmute yourself though, because I can't read lips. I'm not.
The challenge in the periphery there is it's a function of the amount of glucose in the blood, correct?
It's related, yes. And what I mean by the amount of glucose in the blood is related, and the tight glycemic control slows the peripheral vascular progression. But the problem is it doesn't stop it. And that's the hard part about diabetes as a disease. It has these it runs on two rails, and they affect each other, but they still go forward.
So with heart disease, atherosclerosis, we can kind of see, whether the arteries are narrowing, right? We can see the plaque gathering, et cetera. Is there some way of identifying this degree of progression in the peripheral of, okay, the amputation is 3 years down the line, or it's coming fast? Is there a test that identifies that level?
That's a good question, and the answer is no, because there isn't a way to look into that tiny capillary necessarily. So a lot of what we do in diabetes, routine maintenance care, is assess things that affect the microcirculation, like just temperature of the extremities, and capillary refill, when you can squeeze your fingernail and you can see how well it fills up. Sometimes we look at I look at how the hair is growing on toes for those of us who grow hair on our toes. And,
I've been trying that for years and it's not working.
Yeah, well, hobbits grow hair on their toes if you read The Hobbit, but that's getting literary. Okay, so let's think about the microvascular disease. What are the things happen to diabetics? Well, their kidneys go bad, because a kidney is a microvascular circulation. You send all your blood through the kidney. It goes through these tiny glomeruli, and it spits out a little bit of waste with some water, and we call it urine. That has to be reabsorbed, and that's where the kidney falls apart. It's a microvascular disease of the kidney. So a lot of the diabetics, end-stage diabetics, are on dialysis, unfortunately. Heart disease, same thing. You know, when someone has a heart attack with diabetes, you can't just find that one artery that's blocked and bypass it. It's not that easy. And so it poses problems for the surgery if they're trying to bypass a blocked artery, because it's blocked at the very end of the artery, right? So that's a problem. And then, and then the one that we kind of forget about is like the brain. And, the brain also depends on microvascular circulation. And in my experience, and in my practice here on the campus, I'm not dealing with a lot of diabetics, but back in the day of my ER days and back as doing family medicine as a resident, I found that the diabetics had very poor judgment, and because you tear your hair out. When I used to have hair, like why are you making these bad decisions? And I'm thinking, oh yeah, this is a disease of the brain too. They're just not getting blood circulating through their brain. And so I gave them a little more sort of credit when I sort of realized that myself. And so they need help. Anybody who has diabetes needs some help with their decisions and with their care. And as time goes on, the brain and the cognitive function gets worse. And so that's important to sort of understand, because it's very frustrating when people aren't sort of taking care of themselves. But just to say, the exercise effect early on can actually reverse this whole cycle. And that's what's really reassuring. If someone is pre-diabetic, you can put somebody on a no sugar diet and take away the flour and put them on a good, sort of reasonable exercise program. And you can actually reverse this hemoglobin A1C and improve it. And someone can sort of skate by without this diagnosis of diabetes, even though it's hereditary, right? So here's an example of something that's in your genes, but your lifestyle can affect the expression of that gene in full force. And this is a great example. If you want to learn a new word today, it's called epigenetics. And it's basically, we all have genes. We have our 30,000 genes. It's all mapped out. You can go do your 23andMe. Anybody ever done 23andMe? You don't have to raise your hand. Maybe you know somebody. I'm going to confess I've not done it. But you can see if you're related to, Marie Antoinette or Genghis Khan or something like that. But the nice thing about the 23andMe is you can take that data and plop it into some of these other apps and get an enormous amount of genetic information about yourself in terms of what your risks might be for certain conditions. But that's not a sentence, and that's important to understand. That information from that is not a sentence, is that you're going to get that. And I'm going on a tangent here, but hope you guys are okay. But the DNA is basically capped by all these proteins, and they're called histone proteins. And for a gene to be expressed, this cap has to come off of a gene, and that gene has to be expressed in whatever cell it's in. And these histone proteins are dependent on phosphorylation and methylation. And this is very interesting, because methylation is very closely tied to folate metabolism. And now I'm saying something that you guys recognize, right? Because everybody's heard of folate and folic acid. And so where is folic acid? It's in spinach, right? And that's what I always think of, spinach and Popeye and energy. But the bottom line is that high folate diet is actually helps to modulate the gene expression into what becomes expressed, and that's what the epigenetics is. So if our genotype is the genes that we have, the phenotype is what we actually become, and that's where it gets, that step between the genotype and what we become is actually very very complicated in terms of what genes are expressed and why. A good example is the BRCA gene for breast cancer. Everybody's heard of that one. Some famous people have had, have had mastectomies just because they have this gene, right? Because they're high risk. But that's not a sentence for breast cancer. And so for some reason, these things called oncogenes, and you hear the oncogene and there is oncology, are in our genes, and they're there for a reason evolutionarily. We're not exactly sure why, but they're there, and they stay capped. And so the things these genetic predispositions to certain cancers are actually suppressed. Their expression is suppressed by this lifestyle medicine, by these high folate diets. So what's the anti-cancer diet? It's spinach, right? It's all these natural foods. And so that's what we're trying to do with lifestyle medicine. Let's get back to exercise. And I don't want to move on to just quickly talk about another scourge of our, of our sort of cardiovascular system, which is hypertension. And certainly a lot of brands of hypertension are very inherited. But there we go again. There's that inherited thing. And the question is, do we have to inherit all that problem with hypertension? And the answer is, we don't have to inherit all of it. And some of us just have it, low blood pressure, and we just cruise through our life. We go give blood, and they say, "Ma, you have low blood pressure. Do you exercise?" And I'm like, "No, not that much." But bottom line is, I have a little saying with most of my patients is that you have to choose your parents well. But it helps. It only helps to choose your parents well. There's a lot of things that you can do to not happen to you what happened to your parents. And when I talk to my patients about genetics, I go, you got a couple of parents, you got some aunts and uncles out there, and that's where you're going unless you do something different. And that's what lifestyle medicine has proven over and over. And hypertension is one of those examples. I was asked to give a lecture at a hypertension seminar. It was all day on hypertension. So it sounds like a snore, doesn't it? And it was to me a little bit, because it was interesting, because the director of the seminar said, "Hey, you're a sports medicine guy. You want to give a talk at my hypertension sort of seminar?" And I go, "Okay, sure. When do you want me to come?" He says, "Well, why don't you come? We'll have you go at 11 o'clock, and then we'll have the nutritionist go at 11:30. So we'll give you 30 minutes on exercise and 30 minutes on diet." All right. And that was like for the whole day. And there were all these lectures on drugs. How do you treat hypertension? Here's the different types of hypertension. And these are the drugs you can take. It's like all these people taking notes. And every other presenter got a whole hour. And I got 30 minutes. And the nutritionist got 30 minutes, which is really like 20 minutes. Because, you got to give up that time for transition. So I'm like, I thought about that for a second. I thought about my medical education. And, I went to a pretty good medical school here in California. And so I thought about how much time I had with nutrition. And this is a number of years ago. And it's still to this day, medical school has about that fraction of attention paid to nutrition and lifestyle medicine, which is about an hour out of about 10 hours, maybe about a tenth. And I'm going to say 1/10 of the time is probably generous. So I made that comment at the beginning of the lecture because I had to, not because I had my feelings hurt, because it was just true. It's like we, as a medical profession, do not go to diet and exercise as a form of treatment, and so, but we should. And the numbers for hypertension are not that impressive in terms of how much you can actually decrease your blood pressure with the regular exercise. And if you've probably heard about blood pressure, there's a systolic and a diastolic number. There's this like 120/80, which is average. Or if you want to go up to 130, you start becoming pre-hypertensive, and if you get over that, 140, etc. And then the diastolic number is basically the number that your system is always at. Is sort of, that's the sleeping number of your pressure. So that 80 number, that second number, is the one that's actually really advantageous to be low. And so 80 is average, 70 is good, 60 is fine. But if you start creeping up over 90, it's called hypertension. So you can change those numbers going from no exercise to exercise by approximately 8 to 10 points each side of that. So it's like, man, that doesn't sound like much, but it is. And I'll tell you why, because you can change, if let's say someone's 145 over 85, and you change that to 135 over 75, that's terrific. Now, what you've done also those are some of the long-term effects of a regular exercise program. But the immediate effects of blood pressure are actually what I want to talk about for a second. And that is, when you exercise, your blood pressure actually naturally goes up. And all you exercise physiologists out there, are there any exercise physiologists in the crowd? Oh yeah, there's one. There's another one. Oh yeah, there's a few. Okay, so you guys all studied this in school. But you know, the blood pressure is supposed to go up, right? It's supposed to go up. But there's that period post-exercise where it actually goes down. And actually goes down significantly, and it actually stays down for 6 to 8 hours. All right, so that's like, well, it's only 6 to 8 hours, but I'm saying, yeah, 6 to 8 hours. So 6 to 8 hours represents about a third of your day where you're living at a lower blood pressure just because of the exercise that you just did. So I think it's worth it. That's hypertension in a nutshell. But what about some of the other positive things about the exercise that sort of fall out? And certainly we know that exercise improves mood. It stabilizes mood, but it also elevates mood, and it also improves sleep. So if anybody's been involved in some of the sleep medicine lately, that's actually top of the list right now. If you're not getting good sleep, your life expectancy is actually significantly diminished. And so sleep has become sort of the hot ticket these days. And thank goodness, you know, because I like to sleep. There's nothing like going to sleep, right? Sometimes, like right now, maybe for you, hopefully not.
Getting hard to get a solid night's sleep right now, though.
It's really hard. It's really hard to get to bed, and being a sports doctor and a student health doctor on a college campus, and let me tell you, college students have horrible sleep habits, and mostly because they do everything in bed, and that's the first step that I do when I talk about sleep hygiene, and that is to get people off of their bed with their activities, because their body is completely confused about what it's supposed to do there. And so there's no compute. We try to get them off of computing, talking on the phone, eating, watching television. I mean, it just goes on and on, because if you're living in a dorm or in an apartment, that's kind of where you carry on your life. And so breaking those habits is super important. And what's super important is like the habits that you make at that age, you tend to follow you for your life anyways. And so what we know about exercise, though, if you inject it into that sleep quality, is that it improves not only the onset of sleep, but also the quality of sleep. This isn't a sleep talk, but sleep, this quality of sleep, it can be obtained and increased with some of the artificial methods, like some of the prescription or non-prescription sleep aids. Alcohol increases the duration of sleep, but it does not affect the quality of sleep in terms of obtaining the REM sleep that makes you feel rested. So picking a bedtime, having a routine of steps that you go to get to that sleep are super important. But part of that exercise is essential, I think, because your body needs to be tired. And, for some of us, this is still going 100 miles an hour, but at least our body's tired and we can rest our bodies. And if you're still not falling asleep and you've got a good workout, it means some other things that you might want to deal with in your life that, you need to turn the wheel a little slower in your mind. And I'm talking about some of that perseverative thinking that you have when you go to bed, and all those lists that you have to deal with. And I'm just going to say this: I don't think anybody's managing data very well. Anybody here think they're managing their data well? And what I mean is, like, how much data can we process anyways? And remember when we used to go into Barnes and Noble, and there was this I call it the ADD table. ADD stands for attention deficit disorder, because I go into Barnes & Noble because I have an idea for a book I want, and I get stopped by the ADD table of all those books that are so interesting. You're like, oh, here's one on here's one on the Rolling Stones, and here's one on planes, and here's one on, you know, this and that. Well, these guys had this book out there. It was on data. And I thought, this is interesting. I'm going to live through this one for a while. Like, it worked. I didn't buy it, but I read the whole thing almost just standing there. But what they talked about was the amount of data that we process in a day. And what they estimated was that our brains process more data in one day than the same exact human brain processed in about a year during the Renaissance period. So, you know, what, 400 years ago, approximately? And if you think about it, like, whenever I think of Renaissance, I always think about, like, The Princess Bride, my favorite movie, okay? So you wake up in the morning, if you wake up in the morning, right? You're pretty much wearing what you're gonna wear. If you have something else to wear, then you're probably rich, right? And then you're thinking about, if you have something to eat, you eat it. You have one way to get to work if you have somewhere to go to work, or you're just working in your backyard. It's all worked out for you. But think about waking up today. You wake up, you have 25 things that you could wear. You have to make that decision. That's data. You got people talking to you already. You're checking your phone. You go downstairs, there's 5 different types of cereal. And, you know, we're going to talk about cereal in a second, why you shouldn't have cereal first thing in the morning. But, like, you haven't even left the house, and you've done more. And I think, you know, I think 1 year of processing is probably conservative. I think we process more than a year than what might have been processed back in the Renaissance days. So, and mind you, it's the same exact brain. So show me someone who's managing that well, and I'll show you a liar. I don't think anybody's doing it well. And I think we should take some, you know, we try to have all these devices to try and help us, but they're not helping that much. It's not helping me. I'm just extra connected. So sleep, back to sleep, and what about other things about exercise that helps you? Well, other mental health things are, it's a proven treatment, and I mean treatment for depression. And any family doctor, psychiatrist who is not prescribing exercise for someone with clinical depression is not doing a full service for that patient, because it is well documented that regular exercise, usually aerobic, but it can be resistance as well, is a treatment for depression. What about dementia and sort of our mental health sort of as we get older? And this is obviously a hot ticket these days, because more people are getting older and people are living longer, and people are living longer physiologically, but cognitively they're not doing so well as a group. And the question is, you know, is that a side effect of our is that a side effect of just being older? Because, you know, like, what, 100 years ago, no one even made it to 80, right? Hardly. You had to be really pampered and really lucky not to get some infection, you know, 100 years ago to make it to 80. But now we do. And there's a lot of researchers who are looking at, you know, how you get to 80. And actually, I started in my ER practice, and like I said, I practice emergency medicine with all these other things that I do for about 20 years. And every time I got a person who was 90 in my ER for whatever reason, and if they were going to be okay, I just chat with them a little bit and ask them what the secret to getting to 90 is. And I have a whole stack of answers, and I'd love to write a little coffee table book, you know, someday with these answers, because they're really rich. They really are. And people have, you know, researched these people, especially, you know, centenarians over and over. And I'll show you one from a TED Talk in a second. But some of my best answers were really thoughtful. And like, one of my favorite ones was, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't chew, and I don't talk bad about people. How about that? That's how you get to 90. Don't drink.
Problem now. We got a major problem.
Yeah, because people are really talking about people a lot. But I don't drink, don't smoke, don't chew, I don't talk bad about people. That's the best. Another one said, she said, I always hang around people who are younger than me. And I like, so, you know, Stephen and I take that to heart. So we get to go to college every day and see, I'm going to school. So that's really important. So I think, Stephen, you're going to live a long time. I don't know about me. I got to get better sleep. But I think that's another good one. Most of the people described other people. As soon as they thought about their existence of being 90, actually they mentioned other people. It was a spouse, it was a partner, it was a family. It was somebody in their community that came up for them. I have to admit, I know this is a lecture and this is a group of exercise and dieters, but people didn't talk about their exercise necessarily. They talked about other people in their circles, and I thought I'd show you this bar graph, and this isn't. I just thought it because it's. Can I just show my screen? Is that okay? How do I do that? Let's see here. Do I need permission to do that? Oh, here we go. Share screen. Let me see. So if I do this. So Susan Pinker is a longevity researcher, and she gave a TED talk about the secrets to living a long life. And actually, I'll go up this list really quickly, but I just thought it was interesting because this was a group of people who lived in a little on an island in the Mediterranean. So it's very specific to a certain demographic. But they talked about and they tried to break it down into the real factors of living a long life. And then clean air. There's your hypertension treatment. Lean versus overweight. It's sort of growing. Exercise is in the middle of the pack. I'm not sure what they meant by cardiac rehab. Getting a flu vaccine was higher than exercise, which is surprising to me. But here's the ones that are bigger: quit boozing and quit smoking. But at the very top was closer relationships and social integration. So no one's doing any research on the combination of these things. What if you exercise with your friends? What if you diet with some friends? Your chances of success are way higher to improve your longevity and you're basically achieve your goals if you do this with other people. And the hardest part about this COVID thing is we're just not having this opportunity to be with each other. And like I'm sitting here in my office talking to you, but I really, really wish I were in the same room with you. I really do. And so there's something about there that's really missing. That's tugging at our human sort of yearning for connection. And so I just wanted to share that with you as a slide. And then and I wanted also to talk about let's see. Okay, new share. Sorry about this. I'm not so great at it, but I'm going to try and get off this slide so you don't have to stare at it. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I wanted to say a couple things about dementia also and the exercise, but and it has, because dementia has a very strong connection to ultimate mortality. Once people start forgetting, their mortality goes up. And so I have a lot of other ideas about the whole dementia thing in terms of how we're treating our cholesterol and the statin connection to dementia. We're working really hard to keep these numbers down so we can live longer, but I think our brains thrive on fat in our diet, and cholesterol is actually brain food. And so I think some people may not be getting an essential fats at the cost of keeping their lipids and cholesterol super low. I might take some heat for that if you put that out in the social media, because there's people who disagree, but I have an opinion about that. But what about dementia in terms of exercise in the mid part of your life? And so there's one study came out of sports medicine literature, and it was about exercise in your 30s and 40s. And it wasn't just exercise in your 30s and 40s, but it was competitive sort of vigorous competitive exercise, people getting out and like really pushing it. And, you know, that is in an age when people tend to try to do that a little bit, maybe less than in their teens, but people get to be a certain age and they want to do something, you know, they want to push their bodies. And it turns out the people who do that in their 30s and 40s had a far lower incidence of dementia in their 70s and 80s. That was really interesting to me. Why? Because I like that kind of sport. So it was interesting to me personally, but it was interesting as a group in that what you do at this age actually affects you far down the road. And maybe because of what you do at this age sort of defines who you are a little bit down the road in terms of your sort of piss and vinegar, you know. And most of the people who I also interviewed when they got older, they said, I found that they weren't like necessarily the nicest people. Like they weren't kind. They just had to have, they had to have a certain certain badass attitude to get to that place. There has to be a certain amount of determination. But once again, it's that group of people around them, surrounding those people that add to that success. So what else does exercise do? Well, it releases these endorphins, and the endorphins are natural, you know, morphines. These are the addiction. This is the addiction part of marathon running. And if you've ever you know, lived with a runner who didn't get the run in that day, you might want to duck, you know, because it's not a dangerous place to be sometimes if that person who's addicted to that activity doesn't get to do it that day. And that leads me to sort of the idea of, you know, the addictive personality and what we do know about addiction. And I promise I bring this back to addiction, right? Because this is about, because what we have is this obesity thing is as much a part of addiction medicine than it is about probably anything. So we can talk forever and ever about the positive effects of our behaviors on some of these disease processes, but until we get a handle on how our body deals with some of the things that we put in our mouth, including the sugar and the 4 white powders, then we'll never quite get a hold of this epidemic that's going on in our country. But running and aerobic exercise mostly, but even resistance exercise affects in a positive way that feeling of, that sense of well-being. It has to do with the depression situation. Depression and anxiety actually go hand in hand. They have very similar effects in terms of the effects of the positive results from exercise. But this idea of being addicted to something and running is really interesting because it can get out of hand, can it? You know, some people can get sort of addicted to running and not really have it sort of take over their lives. But so can certain foods, and sometimes the running can actually make up for another addiction. And I'll you know, I speak with a lot of stories. So one of my favorite, you know, people who is a friend here and a co-worker had some addiction issues in his life, and running saved his life. Then running took his life. And what I mean is he had some congenital heart issues, but he couldn't stop running. And he actually ended up dying on the heart transplant list because he had worked his heart so much with his exercise in exchange or in place of those other things that would have killed him a long time ago. But he still would go over there and take a swim at lunch, and he would ride his bike into work just to get that exercise because it was literally keeping him alive. And that's how he was dealing with sort of his demons. So how do we avoid getting to that place? Well, 1 out of 10 people have sort of an addictive personality, 1 out of 10. And when I do my sort of physical exams with athletes when they come to the school here, I say, you know, do you have anybody in your family with you know, alcohol problems or drug problems? And when they say yes, if it's a close family member, I get serious for, you know, a little bit, and I go, you might want to just run, you know, from that and try to avoid that sort of college partying situation, because, you know, the drinking and the drugs in college tends to be a binge drinking, but there's always a few that can't handle it, right? And they move on to some sort of addiction. And that's that genetic sort of tag on that person. And it's just the wrong thing. And I really say you might just want to reassess your love of sort of being in a party situation if you have that in your family. The same thing might go for food. And I talked to you. I promised to talk to you before about Susan Pierce Thompson's book, Bright Light Eating. But she's a neuroscientist who made it through the obesity diagnosis through understanding her own addictive personality and addictive nature. And if you ever want to listen to her book or read it, it's really her story is amazing. Short of what she did with her thing called Bright Line Eating, but her story about addiction and the 4 white powders is brilliant in my opinion. Because this story of the 4 white powders doesn't necessarily apply to everybody the same way, but I think everybody kind of gets the effect. And what I mean is this: if you go to South America and you take the cacao leaf and you chew on it a little bit, that leaf, you might get a little bit of a buzz to help you through the afternoon work. And that's what some of the people, some of the indigenous peoples from Colombia, will do. They'll chew on that leaf and they know that it gives them a little bit of a lift. But those people aren't coke heads, and they're not going to go and steal their neighbors their neighbors' things so they can sell it, so they can go get some more cacao leaves to chew on. But if you take that leaf and you process it and you turn it into a white powder, what you have is cocaine. And everybody knows who's lived long enough to be alive in the 80s or knows how much destruction the cocaine can do to some people, right? Some people survive and can handle it well. And there's that genetic predisposition. If you have that genetic predisposition and you sort of step into that high risk zone of a substance like that, it might take you down. But it's the processing of that cacao leaf. And if you go to Afghanistan and you harvest some of the poppy seeds and you sprinkle them on your muffins, which poppy seed muffins are delicious, right? Yeah. But you might also fail your drug test, because those poppy seeds might send you into that heroin positivity test chemically, right? But you don't see me strung out on poppy seed muffins. I just like them, right? And so, but if you take that poppy seed and you process it, and you actually turn it into a sort of a gray powder, and the economy of Afghanistan relies on the export of this gray powder called heroin, and there's a lot of people who are very willing to buy that and inject it into their veins for what they presume is a good feeling. But if you take that one step further now, if you take it to the sugarcane plant, and kids will chew on that, and they might get cavities, they might get caries in their teeth, but they're not necessarily addicted to that sugar cane. But if you take that sugar cane and you process it and turn it into a white, crystalline powder, you have sugar. And the reason I'm mentioning this, and the fourth one, is the grain wheat. And I was raised by my dad was a North Dakota farmer, and we used to go back in the summertime and chew. They give us some of the grains, and the farmers would take and throw it in their mouth, and you chew it, and it would turn into gum, and that's what they use for gum, and that was just grains. And if you take those grains and you make a high grain bread or something like that, you're not necessarily going to be negatively affected in an addictive way. But if you take it and process it and bleach it, and then throw a few vitamins back into it and call it flour, what you have for those 4 white powders is the same effect on dopamine in the brain. And they've done these studies on rats in the same way, and they get the same result, and the animals will do the same thing for all 4 things, right? So that sugar that you get, it's that dopamine rush, and you get that reward of a good feeling. That muffin or that bread or that really good bread from Olive Garden that they give you, they just keep bringing it, they just keep bringing it, they just keep bringing it. And and part of that is that pleasure, that sort of awesome feeling that you get from a dopamine rush. And I think last time I talked about the gluteomorphines and the casomorphines from these proteins also. So remember my pizza story, like I'm not really sure when I'm done eating pizza. I think I could have one more piece. And that's another mechanism on your brain. But these things have neuroactive effects on your brain, and we do get addicted. And unless we approach it with addiction medicine, and I'm not saying we have to take drugs to get over these addictions, but it takes something drastic, right? For those of us who may be addicted to the sugar and addicted to the flour. And we don't know who we are, but the people who are addicted to those things have problems with stopping. And that's where we have to sort of step in and, almost treat it like an Alcoholics Anonymous situation. And what is the only success of Alcoholics Anonymous? Why does it work at all? And by the way, Alcoholics Anonymous, even though it's the only show in town, it doesn't have the best track record for sort of curing alcoholism. The people that I know, that I really know and like and share their alcoholism with me, they say it doesn't go away. And they go to their meetings, and what do they do at their meetings? They support each other. They have a community. So I get back to that community idea, is that our success in these things are really based in getting people involved with us. And so for someone to get over the addiction to sugar or flour, sometimes they swoop in with the exercise to satisfy some of that addiction thing. But what you need is people who love you to help you not let that take over either as an addiction. So there's a balance, but like I said, 1 in 10 people really have addictive issues, and the question is, there's no test, there's no blood test to see if you're on that list. There's no gene that I know of to see if you're going to have a risk for being addicted to alcohol or some other things. You just have to look at the people in your family, basically. Did I talk about one thing or 100 things today? But I just want to, anybody have any questions today or any feedback, any experiences that you'd like to share? I'm not going to call on anybody. Anyway, thanks for being here. It was really good to see you again. And let me know if there's anything that you want me to talk about in future visits or future meetings. If there's some topic, something in your family, some disease thing that you want me to present and sort of do a little zero in on that thing, and in terms of exercise and lifestyle effects on that particular thing, I'd love to do it. But like I said at the beginning of the talk tonight, exercise always wins as being a positive effect on these disease processes out there. And
actually, I do have a question. I thought of one.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband has, I guess they're called fat cysts, like little balls. Would exercise get rid of those or no?
Are you talking about the ones underneath your skin, like lipomas? Yeah. A lipoma has really nothing to do with exercise and whether you're a good person or a bad person. That's not fair. They tend to be very hereditary, and it's just nothing more than what they call they call it a lipoma, because anything that's oma is a tumor, and it's a completely perfectly benign tumor underneath the skin. And the only reason we take them out is for cosmetic reasons, because people like the look of it, or it might be in an area where they're like leaning on it. It's maybe for a woman, it's in a bra line, or if it's leaning on a chair, it kind of bothers you. But those lipomas really have nothing to do with your blood cholesterol, lipids, or anything.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Pretty good timing. It's 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Wait, Steve, you have to unmute yourself if you want to say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. All right, you guys. Blessings,
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Rick.
Have a great night. and stay well.
Thank you. We'll see you later, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.